Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad to be hosting tonight's program with the author David Crow and our good friend Jacques Lamarre, and so glad to see so many friends and new friends in the audience tonight. So I love that you're already chatting in the chat. Please keep that up throughout the program. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, Connecticut. And we've been doing these programs since last April. Believe it or not, it's been more than a year since we took our program virtually, and it has been quite an experience. We've just loved welcoming new people from all over the world and being able to bring in authors who might not be able to travel to Hartford otherwise to spend an evening with us. So thanks for being part of that phenomenon. I'm not going to stay on too long. I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who might be new to Crowdcast, the program we're using tonight. You've already, as I said, discovered the chat, so keep chatting away. But toward the end of our program, David is going to take questions from the audience. And if you do have a question for David or Jacques, please post them in the Ask a Question section that you see at the bottom middle of your screen. It will make it a lot easier for us to manage the Q&A at the end. I am absolutely delighted to say that the Mark Twain House and Museum is opening for tours, guided tours, for the first time in many, many months this weekend. We are very close to being sold out, and we're so grateful for the support from our audience, our community, and hope that all of you will one day make your way to the Mark Twain House in person yourselves. In the meantime, you can visit us at marktwainhouse.org. We've got a 3D virtual reality tour that you can enjoy, and you can check out a full calendar of our programs that we offer on Crowdcast, and I think you'll be really surprised and happy to see the range and breadth of those programs, and we hope to see you at many of them. One of the great things that we are able to do through these programs is to sell copies of the author's books that we'll be talking about. This wonderful book, The Pale-Faced Lie, David Crow's book that we're talking about tonight. You can purchase it through the link in the chat and know that it's a signed copy. And, you know, we're no dummies. We know you could buy this book somewhere else, but please know that your purchase through us benefits the Mark Twain House and Museum, which is of very great value to us and very much appreciated. So on that note, before I introduce our guests, I would just like to say that this has been quite a year for everybody, for museums, as well as, you know, in their own way, everybody. And we've been without our main source of revenue, that guided house tour that I just mentioned, for most of the year. And we've really been relying on the kindness of strangers and friends through their donations. And people have really anteed up and been very grateful, very generous with us, for which we are very grateful. Now is a particularly advantageous time if you are inclined to make a donation to the Mark Twain House, because the Travelers Championship golf tournament, Birdies for Charity program adds 15% to your donation if you donate during tonight's program or through the end of June. So please consider that, knowing that the donation you make will be amplified by that. So having talked for much longer than I should have, I know you're all anxious to hear about our guests. Tonight we're going to be talking with David Crow. David Crow spent his early years on the Navajo Indian Reservation in Arizona and New Mexico. Through grit, resilience, and a thirst for learning, he managed to escape his abusive childhood, graduate from college, and build a successful lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. Today, he's a sought-after speaker, giving talks to various businesses and trade organizations around the world. Throughout the years, he's mentored more than 200 college interns, performed pro bono service for the charitable organization Save the Children, and participated in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. An advocate for women, he donating a percentage of his royalties from the sale of this book to the Barrett House, a homeless shelter for women in Albuquerque. He and his wife, Patty, live in the suburbs of D.C. And David's going to be joined in conversation this evening by our dear friend, Jacques Lamarre. Jacques is a playwright. He used to have my job before I did. He was the marketing director at the Mark Twain House and Museum, and now he works with us as a consultant, and he is beloved by all. So we're really delighted to have both of them here this evening, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming Jacques and David to the screen and to the Mark Twain House and Museum. Jacques and David, thank you so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And I'll see you guys in a few minutes at the Q&A, and I'm going to sit back and enjoy your conversation.
Wonderful. Before we dig into your amazing book, David, I just wanted to give you a moment to extol Mark Twain, because I found out in conversation with you the other day that you're a Mark Twain fan.
I'm a big Mark Twain fan. I read him when I was young. You know, I tried to read everything with a flashlight under the covers. When I wasn't creating tremendous mischief, I was either running or reading. And one of the things I loved about Mark Twain, and maybe I tried to do the same thing as him, although that would be arrogant beyond belief to think you could do anything close to what Mark Twain did, but was to tell people what really happened. Right? I mean, he dealt with the slavery issues, and I dealt with the Indian issues and how people really are on an Indian reservation and what it's like, the alcoholism and what a reservation's really like and what life was really like. And I tried to take complicated issues and break them down just exactly the way I saw it and felt it without trying to appease people on the left or the right, just try to say it the way it was. And what I loved about Mark Twain and his stories about slavery and the things he saw, I thought he did the exact same thing. He was honest. People might be shocked by the language, shocked by what he said, but what he said was what he saw. And what I said was what I saw. And I even ran my book by some of my Native American friends, my Navajo friends I grew up with, and they all said the same thing. It was brutal, but you're honest, you're accurate about the way you're portraying it. So when I get some emails and that are hateful from people, you know, like, I can't believe what a jerk you are, it wasn't really like that, I can honestly say, yeah, it was really like that. And I feel like I love the authenticity of Mark Twain. I think that gave his story such great strength. To the best of my ability, I tried to do the same thing.
Well, I think you certainly succeeded. He was known for telling what he called stretchers. So I think your book's an incredibly honest book. So I think in that regard, you may be one up on Mark Twain.
Well, I saw some pretty incredible stuff. I actually had to cut some out.
It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. So using Mark Twain as a little bit of a segue, it's very apparent from the beginning of the book that you were a mischief maker like Tom Sawyer, but times 3. I think that why don't you talk about a little bit about that, because it factors in quite a bit in the beginning of your book. And well, actually, no, it goes all the way through pretty much.
Yeah, I raised hell from the day I came out of the birth canal till the day this book was over. And I still enjoy fun, although some of the stuff I did is probably highly illegal and people wouldn't appreciate it now. So I probably cut some of that out.
Yeah, some of it was downright dangerous too, for you and others. I mean, where do you think that came? Do you think that came from your father, or do you think that was a way of acting out when you were at liberty, or because your mom wasn't paying attention, or all the above?
All the above. The thing I'd say is I'm really different than my siblings. They're much better people than me, all 3 of them. I had just an insane, creative, mischievous side. It would never have been showed itself the way it did if I hadn't been raised the way I was, right? My father wanted me to do everything I could to defy anything in society as long as he didn't get caught and blamed. If he got caught and blamed, you're dead meat. But as long as you did something horrible and you didn't get caught and no one thought he had anything to do with it, he loved it. So he encouraged it. But I want to get at a little deeper theme than just that. From the very first memory, I was really in shock, right? I've got these 2 parents and somehow I've got to live through this and my siblings do. And there's a whole lot of, if I wasn't laughing, I was crying, right? So I acted out because I didn't want to be home. When I was home, it was violent. It was very difficult. I saw my father do things to my mother that were incredible. What he did to his kids, right? My brother and I buckle into the belt and he'd beat us until he got tired of it. And so it was horrific. My older sister, at 14, tried to commit suicide by taking a couple of bottles of aspirin. I mean, this was not easy stuff. And I understood that I was going through something horrible, but I didn't understand what to do about it. And what I tell people is there's two things that anyone should know about a kid who goes through this. One, that kid is broken. There isn't anything about that kid that's normal and happy. And that kid doesn't like themselves very much because they don't like what they're seeing. Unless they're a psychopath, what they're seeing is horrible. And it's things that you don't want, I can't imagine my kids seeing it. And I'm a brand new grandfather. I can't imagine my granddaughter ever knowing any of this except in a book. So when I left the house, I acted out, to the extreme. And of course, the town of Gallup, New Mexico, is got to be, particularly when I go up there, the craziest, wildest Indian border town you can imagine. It was Dodge City on steroids. 10,000 people, 61 bars, a jail with 700 cells, drunks everywhere all the time. And a guy, Ray Pino, who sold me half the cherry bombs, firecrackers, all I could use. And my brother and I just went all out to do as much destruction as we could. And we were smart enough, clever enough to mostly get away with it. But in Gallup, New Mexico, you'd have to shoot somebody at point blank range in front of the police station to be noticed, right? In one year, they had 41,000 people arrested for being drunk, and that didn't get it like a tenth of them. Those are just the ones that were so passed out a car might run over them. So my childhood, my life was an incredible combination of insane things that happened at a place at a time that was at the end of an era. And even as a kid, I knew what was going on with the Navajos and Gallup was at the end of an era. The horse-drawn wagons, people coming in once a year for supplies, the bars that were just open at 7 a.m. till 2 a.m. 7 days a week, and you could use the back door between 2 and 7. It was an incredibly crazy life. And I didn't want to be home 1 second. And so I was raised on the streets of the Navajo Indian Reservation town of Fort Defiance in Gallup, New Mexico. And I basically raised myself and my younger brother, who somehow survived having me as an older brother.
I so want to talk to you about your brother because there's a succession of disasters, but I don't want to give those away because I think people really need to read the book to be amazed that it's amazing that you survived your upbringing. But I think he is particularly lucky to have survived several times.
He's lucky he lived to be 4.
Yes. So because there are a number of people who have not read the book, why don't we talk a bit about your father and your mother, because the book is, you're caught between these two people. And also I'd like to know how they met and when things started to sour.
So my father went into World War II and was in and out before the war was over. Right. So he had 9 months. Mm-hmm. And he claims it's the only good food he ever ate. He had a very, very difficult childhood. His father may have been as crazy as he was. And believe me, that's saying something. So my dad got out of the Navy and he was put out in Los Angeles, right? He gets off the boat. He's an Okie with nowhere to go. His mom somehow lives in that area, and he's trying to find a job, right? He's a 19-year-old guy, and I don't think he's got his GED yet. My 15-year-old mom had, basically 8th or 9th grade education, and he got a job in an ice house in Los Angeles, carrying big blocks of ice and using them for swamp coolers. And I guess bars and restaurants chipped up the ice and used it. And my mom's brother worked at the ice house. And she walked by one day and he decided he thought she looked great at 15. And he basically pursued her. She had a mom that dragged her all over the country to clean hotels. She was left alone for weeks at a time in these hotels, and her mom would come back and forth, once or twice a year. She would do anything to get out of the house, and she glommed onto him, and he glommed onto her. And unfortunately, they got married he was just before 18, and she was just at 16, almost to the day. I mean, their courtship probably amounted to, "Hey, you look great. Let's get married and go to bed." Yeah. I mean, it was certainly nothing elaborate. She would have done anything to get out of the house, and he probably would have just done anything that he felt like doing. Not a good fit.
And
just so bad. By the time he hit 21, he was in a maximum security prison with a pregnant wife, and they hadn't had their first anniversary yet. I mean, when he was.
So let's talk about how he ended up in San Quentin.
Well, Dad was a guy that is built like an NFL linebacker, and he had a hair-triggered temper, and he had an insecurity and inferiority complex. And I don't understand it. He's the smartest guy I ever met. But everything offended him, right? If somebody looked at him wrong, if somebody accidentally bumped him, if anything, he'd get angry. So this is in the book, but I'll give you a little bit more. My dad immediately got my mom pregnant. And so they were living in a rented house with her parents. And my grandmother was carrying on with the landlord, right? And my grandfather was a watchman. So she's busy, unfortunately, sleeping around with the landlord for favors. And that's how she did the hotels, too. She cleaned hotels and basically was a pretty immoral woman. So my pregnant mom is on the couch, and the landlord, who's been sleeping with my grandmother, walks through the room on his way out. Grandfather's a night watchman, and he couldn't have cared less what she did. And he looks at my mom and says, "You're really good looking. Wish I could date you instead of your mom." So he comes home from whatever job he had, and my mom tells him what the guy said. And then my grandmother inexplicably says, "You need to go beat the hell out of this guy. He's insulted your manhood." Well, as I say in the book, it's like kicking a sleeping bull in the private parts. So my dad ran off and grabbed his best friend, who turned out to be his supervisor, a very simple-minded man, a nice man, but very simple-minded. He worshiped my dad, and he said, "We got to go kill this guy." So they drove into Los Angeles, where this guy lived. And the guy was basically a slumlord and a porch mechanic. So they feigned that they had a broken down car and that they wanted to rent a trailer. So this guy came out, and my dad had the hood up like there was something wrong. And he got a wrench and he just started slamming the guy in the head. And his friend hit him as hard as he could from behind. Well, the story is, as the story goes, this guy, when he reached his head over the hood, he knew something was wrong. So he took the rotor the old car rotor, and he put it in his pocket because he thought he was going to be robbed. He didn't think he was going to get beaten. He didn't have any idea what he had done wrong. And so they beat him till he collapsed on the ground and he's bleeding out. And they thought he would stop breathing, and they thought they killed him. So they go to get in their car to leave. They can't because of the rotor. So they steal his car. They take the keys out of his pocket, and they get about a half mile, 3/4 of a mile, stop his car, and they're throwing all the papers out so that somehow the police won't think it's a stolen car, and they get caught. So when they get caught, they say, well, we think he died, but we're not sure he was dead yet. And they basically confess. And my dad's accomplice said, well, he had it coming. I'm glad we killed him. But what happened that saved this guy's life, it didn't save his eyesight. He was blind and could never walk again. But his wife thought something was wrong, and she found him before he bled out. An ambulance came. He had like 10 blood transfusions, and somehow he lived through this. And but they didn't know he'd lived for several months, right? So it would have been a death penalty if he was killed, because it's premeditated murder. I mean, hard to put a pretty face on this.
Yeah.
But somehow he lived. He didn't live very well. He was an invalid, but he didn't die, and that saved my dad's life right there. So I wouldn't have been born if he had died, because then the death penalty was something they did all the time.
Yeah.
And if they didn't, they didn't let you out of jail for something like that for 30 years. So it was just a miracle that he got through that without the death penalty.
So this is a good transition to how you ended up in living in the Navajo Indian Reservation.
Well, Dad had two great ideas coming out of prison. And that's a whole nother story. His IQ tested higher than anybody that they had in San Quentin. And most prisoners are idiots, and not that he wasn't, but meaning their IQ is low. So low IQ means you don't have any skills. You probably can't do anything other than what got you into prison. But Dad had a really high IQ, and he had a wife. And at this point, he had a kid that was born in prison. My older sister was born. He didn't meet my older sister until she was about, 2 or 3 years old. So he got out, but he knew two things. You have to check the box if you're a violent felon, and that is not a pretty thing to do then or now, right? Who wants to hire you if you're a violent felon? And he also knew his accomplice, though he wasn't a really mean guy. Dad had really betrayed him and blamed him for the whole thing. And this guy got a good long time in prison for basically doing what his friend asked him to do, right? You can argue how smart was he, but he did what Dad asked him to do. Dad thought if he went to the Navajo Indian Reservation, you could lie about being a violent felon, and who in the world would think to look for you on the Navajo Indian Reservation, then or now, right? If you went and hid anywhere near my hometown, no one would ever find you. Maybe with the internet, it's different. But so Dad got away with faking some references. And in Indian Reservation at that time, in the 50s, this is before affirmative action or any of those things. If you were capable of driving a truck, using a shovel, and you didn't kill somebody that day, you got promoted because no one wanted to work there. It's like living in a third world country. And as much as I love the Navajos, and I do, it's still like that in most places. So he was willing to do that. He got paid well, and his accomplice never found him. From his perspective, it was a complete success.
Now we're gonna do a relatively large spoiler in terms of the title, with the book being called The Pale-Faced Lie. You were raised to believe that you were at least 50% Cherokee.
Well, we are 100%. We are warriors.
Oh, all right. Your mom was Cherokee too?
Oh hell yeah, we're warriors. Are you kidding?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna clean out the whole world and get even with them. Yeah, Dad
So,
wasn't just a Cherokee. He was the real deal, and he was after the white man. I mean, he whatever he could dream up, he dreamed up the maximum load, right? So he even convinced us our mother was a full-blooded Indian. She is the palest white woman you've ever seen in your life. But she was raised in the town of Quanah, Texas, named after the great Comanche chief, Quanah Parker. And so
mhm.
the theory was she was related to him, and he was a full-blood Cherokee. She was full-blood, and we just kept that going. Dad was kind of dark and swarthy, but
Uh-huh.
my mom's side is the opposite. But Dad was really dark and really heavily built, heavily muscled, and our last name was Crow, right? But part of my theory on the Cherokee thing, if you got a job on a reservation, particularly then, you could call yourself a Martian. No one really cared. I mean, Dad was a world class BSer, and he just made stuff up. But if you challenged him, you're going to get in a fight, and it might be a fight to the death. And most people were sort of smart enough to just leave him alone. But he absolutely convinced himself, at least I think he did, and us. We were Cherokees living on our sister reservation with the Navajos. But what I can tell you is, looking like I look, and I'm no
Mhm.
darker now, probably I was lighter then. Convincing Navajo kids not to beat you up because you're a full-blooded Cherokee did not work. Not at all, right? I mean, um, and my best friends on the reservation, whenever I see them, the first thing I'll say is, "How dumb did you think it was for me to pretend to be an Indian on an Indian reservation?" Right? My Illinois farm family would be like pretending that you were a lifelong farmer when you pull up in a Cadillac and a three-piece suit and you don't know corn from beans, right? I mean, who's going to buy this?
But this isn't like a Rachel Dolezal situation where you are knowingly white and passing yourself off as a person of color. You actually were raised to believe
We were.
that you were Cherokee.
Yeah, we were. And in fact, I have a feeling right now, if you were to, you know, ask my brother and two sisters if they're Cherokee, they might still say yes. I mean, my wife did the DNA, and I did the DNA before I met her. I went through the Mormon church, who had great records. And the one time I challenged my dad, which is a big mistake, I said, your dad was the seventh of 12th on a farm, and his name was Meredith Taylor Crow. Didn't seem very Cherokee to me. And he slugged me, right? I mean, don't you ever talk about, it's like I called him a pig or something, or call him a liar. And he would get very violent. So, no one questioned it. And I think the thing in the book you'll see, we wanted to identify with something positive in the worst way. We needed something. We had a mentally ill mom that I thought was dead. She was homeless for a long time, didn't see her for years. We had this violent father who later acquired a wife who was even worse than he was. And the Crow children wanted to believe something good. And the Cherokee thing gave us something good to believe. Honorable people, original Native Americans, fought hard for their land, loyal people, smart people, that was a whole lot better than believing that you're the son of a psychopath who's would beat anybody to death for no reason at all and had absolutely no morals and no values. We didn't want to believe that. The Cherokee place gave us, even if it was a tiny, safe place, it gave us a safe place to go.
But you weren't even surrounded by Cherokees. You were surrounded by Navajo. And
Well, that's the key, right? If you're going to tell the big lie, if you go live among Cherokees and say you're a Cherokee, that ain't going to work, right? So, I mean, it just isn't going to work unless they're just not. So, to claim you're a Cherokee with living with the Navajos, and my dad's doing a job for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? He's with Indians all the time and wore the bolo tie and used the lingo. And the name Crow is Gagi and Navajo. So we're using the lingo. We're acting like we're part of this tribe that's a sister tribe to the Navajos, and we're just kind of going with the flow, right? And you don't have a lot of white people on a reservation pretending to be Indians. It's not like there's a big crowd of people doing this.
Yeah.
And again, Dad was heavy set, dark, mean, and somebody you wanted to stay the hell out of the way of if you could.
So just real quick, I had said when we were having our conversation the other day, you know, I had assumed the name Crow that you were Native American. I'm like, he doesn't necessarily look it, but I don't, then I'm like, I'm stereotyping, so I shouldn't be doing that. So let's talk about the name Crow real quick, because it's not addressed in the book.
So a lot of my friends, particularly once I left the reservation, just assume we were Indian because our last name is Crow, right? I guess it would be like having the last name Apache or Comanche or Blackfeet or, Crow's a name of a tribe, right? And it's a name of an animal. Indians do that sort of thing more than other people. But in reality, the name Crow is either Northern English, Irish. My wife claims it's English. I think there's a good bit of Irish there. But the son of Crow is McEnroe, and the Crow with the name E is common in the northern part of England, which is now up near Belfast in Northern Ireland. It's not an unusual name coming from there. My family came over in the early 1700s, 1720, 1730, well before the Revolution. And I'm assuming that they kind of got booted out of England, Ireland. They were debtors. They just wanted to get out. They came before the Mayflower. I don't know how they got here exactly, but we know that they came, and we know about when they came. So it's one of those crazy. It's something that seems like it's something else, right? Crow, Indian, reservation, dad that's dark. Yeah, it adds up. And I've had several friends say, "Oh my God, of course you were Indian." And no, but if you put all these circumstances together and layer it with a big BS story, you can come up with some Indian stuff. But oddly, in my journey in writing the book and in going on tours and doing all kinds of stuff, I've met 4 David Crows. I never had met one ever in my life. I even met one that lived on the reservation I lived on 10 years. Yeah, I mean, and this is even crazier. His daughter was in a hospital where my son's a doctor and said, "Hey, my dad's David Crow. What's your dad's name?" And of course, his David Crow. "Hey, I read this book called The Pale-Faced Lie. Is that your dad?" and they met that way, and the other David let me know. But again, this is all circumstantial stuff. He's not Indian. I'm not Indian. But we both lived on an Indian reservation. His dad ran a sawmill. There's a lot of timber in the northern part of the reservation up on the Defiance Plateau. But these are all just crazy happenstances. We sound like we had an Indian name, but we did not. And we acted like we're Indian, but we were not.
So let's talk about, we talked a bit about your dad. Let's talk about your mom a bit more. Because she's an incredibly tragic figure.
She is.
But also a very manipulative figure in a lot of ways as well.
She sure is. Believe it or not, thank God she doesn't know about the book. And hopefully she never will. My mom is 90. She lives. And she is the single most unhappy human being I've ever met in my life. My wife and I are lucky enough to meet a granddaughter over the weekend, and we have a new grandson. It just an embarrassment of riches. And in between these two dates, my mother calls me And she said, "How was your Easter?" And I said, "I had the best Easter of my life." And she said, "Well, I had the worst Easter of my life." And she said her adopted son took her to a nice dinner with his wife's family, and everybody was nice to her, served her a nice meal, went out of their way to be nice. But she hated them because they didn't know what to talk to with her in a way that made her feel happy. I've never seen my mom smile. I've never seen my mom happy. If you give her more than 5 minutes on the phone, she will regurgitate everything that went wrong from the time she was born until now. I often say to myself after I hang up with her, and it's every other day, how could God let somebody live this long and be this miserable? And I've never met anyone like her. She's the saddest person I've ever known. It brings me great heartache. I always felt like I was responsible for Mom. And when she went homeless and I didn't go with her, and she begged me to go when I was 10, I think that sequence of events broke something inside of me that took many, many decades to fix. I always felt like I abandoned my mom and I should have gone with her. She said, "You can cut grass and deliver papers and we'll go on welfare, and you just go and take care of me. You'll be the head of the house." She really believed that. And she still blames me to this day for abandoning her. And, intellectually, I know that's nonsense, but I'm going to tell you, when you're a little kid and you watch your mom being smashed to the ground by your dad, and she's got nothing but a broken down car. She had a 9th grade education, but I swear to God, she still doesn't have the knowledge of a 3rd grader. I stood a lot better chance if I had just gone out on the street than she ever did. How she lived through all this is a miracle, but I'll tell you quickly, she remembered a man who did philanthropy, and she went to a payphone in Albuquerque, and she slept in her car, and every day she would call this company and ask for this man. And it took a long time because he was frequently out doing whatever you do, and she had no number to leave, right? So a policeman gave her a blanket, and she slept in her car in a park, and it was a broken down car. My dad cut both brake linings, and somehow she didn't go fast enough to kill herself, which she easily could have, and the mechanic fixed her brakes for free. She was down to $80. And finally, the philanthropist man, his name is Tom Collins, excuse me. And he died before I could go back and thank him. But he got her a room, and he got her clothes, and he got her food, and he got her legal help to come see us eventually. And he got her a job as a truck stop waitress trainee, making 80 cents an hour. And at this truck stop, she met a truck driver who married her, stayed married to her for 51 years. They had a son who was basically handed to them in a church parking lot. That was because this couple had a child out of wedlock and they didn't want anybody to know. They just handed this kid off. And this kid is now 45 years old and takes care of her. He's a great man. He's a good friend. He's like a brother to me. But she was somehow protected by angels. And yet, if you asked her right now, she was on this call, if she's lucky, she'd tell you she's the most unlucky, the most unhappy, the most put upon person on the face of the earth. And I tell people, I try to stay on the phone with her every other day so that she doesn't have longer to be really angry. But it's like climbing into a phone booth with Muhammad Ali and hoping you don't get knocked out. I'd rather do that than call her. And I just wish to God there was anything I could do to change her, make her life better. But there just isn't. If she gets it, she's a walking tragedy. And it's incredibly sad that she has no sense of gratitude or happiness or just nothing.
Now, let's talk about your siblings, because I mean, obviously, the book is all from your viewpoint. How have they responded to the book, and what did it bring up for them?
Well, in the beginning, they were all three against it. Said, don't do this. And I changed their names, which, you could figure out who they were if you wanted. And when I wrote the book, my younger brother got really angry with me. And it's interesting why. So if you read the book, you'll know my younger brother, he's the greatest guy in the world, loved my brother more than anything. But if you went to him and said, here's a secret, don't tell anybody, he would go tell the first 10 people he saw. He has no sense of keeping a confidence or anything. He never did, right? And if you read the book, he nearly got us both killed a bunch of times by telling the wrong people what we had just done. And more importantly, telling us what our dad did. So my dad never took my brother into his confidence, ever. And he never took my brother with him when he did crimes. He took me. So he knew I'd keep my mouth shut. He knew I would try hard to keep him out of trouble. And he knew that he could confide in me. Now, I went along for self-preservation. And I also knew that if I could catch my dad an instant before his hair trigger temper went off, he had a blood vessel that came out, and if it bulged like a garden hose and his eyes bugged out, somebody's going to get killed or flee before they do. If you could catch him just before that, I could talk him out of doing something stupid. Sometimes it worked, most times it did not. But my brother was never involved in any of this stuff. So he called me up one day and he said, everything in the book is a lie. And I said, Steve, that's fine. If you can tell me anything that's wrong, I'll fix it before it's published. Well, I don't know if I can do that. And he said, the whole thing's a lie. I said, so we weren't raised on a reservation. Dad didn't come out of San Quentin. Mom's brake lights weren't cut. You didn't go through all these things. Well, maybe. So I said, do you know what your middle name is? He said, yeah, my middle name's Eddie, Eddie. And I said, it's not Edward. It's not Edwin. It's not Edgar. It's not Ed. It's Eddie. You want to know why? Well, you don't know. I said, sure I do. Eddie was the only prison guard at San Quentin that was nice to Dad. He handed him the telegram when our older sister was born. He was the only one not mean to him. Dad loved him enough to name his second son after prison guard. I can tell you 1,000 things you don't know about yourself. And from that point on, we didn't talk for about 6 months. And then I went through, he lives in Denver near my son. I went by to see him and he gave me a huge hug and it's like it was all forgotten. And he got over it. My older sister, I worried about because, there's some sexual references and she clearly swallowed aspirin. So my niece, who works for me, is old enough now. She read the book to my sister one chapter at a time, and my sister would cry, but at the end of each chapter, she would put a thumb up. So I got her permission to write the book. My younger sister is kind of estranged from the family, but I made sure I mailed her a copy way before. But I'm kind to my siblings. My siblings are great people. They got me through the worst days of my life. But unfortunately, we remind each other of the worst days of our life. And we were like a gang, right? We were raised to be a gang, pitted against each other. So I'm close to my older sister now. I'm close to my brother. I'm in touch with my younger sister. But the four of us will never be in the same place ever again. We were the day my dad died and I did the eulogy. I looked over at them and knew I'd never be together with them as a group again. My brother walked over and said, why in the heck did you give him a good eulogy? Don't you feel like the darkest cloud in the world has passed? And I said, I'm going to tell you something. A funeral is no place to vent your dirty laundry, to get even, to settle a score. It's a place to say goodbye. And he was your dad. He was my dad. And I didn't lie. I just left a lot of stuff out. To my way of thinking, I did the right thing. I'm not going to trash my dad at his eulogy. At some level, I still love my dad, and you can't hate everything about your life and love yourself, and you just can't. And so, even though I have great difficulty wrestling with his memory and wrestling with the things he did, to the best of my ability, I try to remember some good. He was intellectually the most curious person I've ever known. He taught me to love the great English masters, to learn, to think. He challenged me constantly. When he wasn't beating me with the buckle end of a belt, he was screaming at me to be the smartest guy in the room if I could. I tried to take the plus of that, and on most days I can forget the negative. When I finished the book, I had healed. I knew I had healed, and I felt that what happened in my life happened to somebody else. It didn't happen to me. I forgave him, and I forgave myself. Maybe forgiving myself for some of what I did wrong was even harder than forgiving him. Because if you grow up like I do, you think you're a bad person. You don't like yourself. You don't know that. You carry enormous guilt and shame. And it's taken me a lifetime to throw that off. And I still have days when I struggle with that.
Now, I could talk to you for another 50 minutes, but I know that there's some questions, and I also want to give people a chance to put their questions into the Q&A if they have them. We'll invite Jennifer back on.
Jacques, I want to thank you for having the good idea to invite David to do a talk with us. I'm just so moved and so inspired by you, David. And I so many people who have difficult upbringings, difficult childhoods, use as an excuse throughout their lives. And it seems like you did just the opposite. You have made so much of your life and been such a positive force. And I just want to, first of all, commend you for that, but also ask you, did you have did you have mentors or sources or were there people who helped you get to that way of looking at the world rather than just devolving into bitterness as so many people would?
Yeah, I'll say that it took me a while to do this, but I married into the best family in the world, the Lee family. They're a Norman Rockwell painting. You know, what you learn is no one's perfect, but they're the best people in the world, my farm family. And I could never thank them enough. And I'm so blessed that I get to spend the rest of my life with them. But I had what I call 7 angels. My first angel was an 80-year-old Navajo woman. After we lost sight of our mom and we're living in a part of the reservation where white people or Cherokees, no one's allowed to live there. It's the ghetto. A ghetto inside a ghetto in a reservation is not a pleasant place. My half-mile walk to school every day, I got beat up constantly. I was in 4 or 5 fights both ways. And part of my personality, my brother ran, I stood and fought every kid. If anybody took a swing at me, I took a swing back because I knew you have no place to hide, no place to run. I watched what the missionary kids did and how they were beat up and they ran off and they whimpered, and I never did that, right? But this 80-year-old woman lived across the street from us, and one day she came over, and I mean, we were scared to leave our house except for school. And she said, I noticed that you 4 are alone, and I wonder if I could start your homework and help you cook some food or make some food. And her name was Evelyn. And I fell in love with Evelyn. Evelyn was the first adult who loved me unconditionally, didn't want anything from me. And she would tell me stories. Her grandmother was 4 during the long walk. This is the Navajo Holocaust. They marched every Navajo that they could round up 300 miles. If you were pregnant, old, too young, too weak, they shot you in the head and kept going. They imprisoned the Navajos for 4 years in Fort Sumter, which was just a hellhole. And they marched them back. And less than 8,000 were alive when they did this. And they did the same thing. They shot them in the head if they were weak or firm or in any way slowing them down. Her 4-year-old grandmother came back from a long walk. And Evelyn would tell me stories that her grandmother forgave the cavalry who did this. And she taught me the word hazoni, which is Navajo for harmony, and ajuba, which is grace. And she told me to have harmony and grace in my life and to learn to forget. And every day she would hug me and kiss me on the forehead. And I came back from one fight that's in the book with Gilbert Blackcoat. He's 4 years older, 30 pounds heavier. He nearly killed me, right? I mean, he hit me so hard that, I think I had a headache for a month. So I came dragging myself back, blood everywhere, shirt ripped. She dragged me to the bathroom, washed my entire face with a washcloth, told me she loved me, and she said, "Stop fighting with those boys." I said, "Evelyn, I have no choice. They're going to beat me one way or the other. I'm going to fight back." She wanted to walk to school with me, fight. And every day when I came home, I was scared she wouldn't come over, but she did. And I was scared to tell her I loved her because I was so afraid she might not say it back.
Oh.
And one of my great regrets, and I hope I won't cry on this, but it's right up there. I went back to thank her once I fully understood she had died 6 months earlier. And I never got to thank her for what she did for me. But she's in my heart every day of my life. And I know what I would have done without Evelyn. And my next mentor was a Navajo Indian code talker, Marine, World War II, who had 10 kids. And his second son was my best friend. He was my 4-H teacher. We raised sheep. He was my little league coach. And he was the most tough love guy I knew, right? He didn't hit me or yell at me, but I was the world's biggest hell raiser, right? We would go to the Winter Rock Civic Center, and they would have wrestling matches, the old timey wrestling matches, and you'd get a movie that was 2 or 3 years old. One day there was a wrestling match, right? 300-pound guys, and I got a cherry bomb. I threw it up into the ring, and it went off, and basically everybody ran, and I sprinted to the bathroom, slid into the bathroom before I got caught. Well, he was waiting for me. He picked me up by the neck, the way a mama dog would a puppy. If you ever do anything like that again, you're not on my little league team. You're not going to do 4-H, and you can't come to my house.
Wow.
I will still love you, but I won't put up with you.
Oh, wow.
And I would do all kinds of crazy stuff to him and his family, but I stopped doing it at his house. I can tell you that. But his impact on me was enormous. And I came back in college. I dropped out of college. I had gone through some things, and I went back to the reservation, worked construction in Gallup. And one day I dropped by his house, and he said, "Come over here and sit down." And he grabbed me by the shirt, and he said, "Get out of here. Go back. I don't know what you're afraid of. You're afraid of your father. You're afraid of your family. But you're not Navajo. You're not Cherokee. You don't belong. Don't come back. Get out of here. Do not come back.
Wow.
And I'll be waiting for you." And I was so mad at him. About a year later, I understood why he did it. When I came back, he had also died, but I'm very close to his children. His son Richard and I are really close friends. He runs the Gallup Housing Authority and is probably the most unselfish person I've ever met. And he and I talk about his dad and his mom every time I'm back. So my first two angels really set my course. My third angel was an African American coach. We moved to Maryland. Moved to Maryland for about a year and a half. Back again. So on the day Martin Luther King was assassinated, April 4th, 1968, I'm in 10th grade. And our track team in Bethesda, Maryland, went across the DC line to run against an all-black team. I'd only met one black person in my life, but I knew my teammates were scared. They're nervous, right? And I didn't understand it. We got across the DC line. I saw poverty, but I saw much worse poverty on the reservation. But we got to the meet, and there was a lot of trash talk and pushing and shoving, and somebody wound up stealing one of our sprinters' shoes. And so we got into a fight at the end of the meet. We got on the bus. Now, my coach was black with an all-white team. Their team was all black with a white coach. I mean, go figure.
Wow.
This is as crazy as being Crow and not Indian. My coach got us on the bus, and he said, "I raised you to be gentlemen. I raised you to be polite. I raised you not to take the bait. I've taught you to be gentlemen. You're going to get off this bus and apologize. And one of the guys said, "We're not going to do it." He said, "Fine. I'm sure you'll find your way back to school 7 or 8 miles to the district. Good luck with that." We got off. We apologized. When he got us back, he read me the riot act. All of us. Don't you ever behave like that. Don't you ever take the bait. Don't you ever use a racist comment. I don't care what's said to you. You act like gentlemen.
Wow.
You act like you belong. So I go home and I find out Martin Luther King, we all did, has been assassinated. My dad stays in D.C. till 1 o'clock in the morning. Little bit of a spoiler. Helps looters loot. Brings home a stereo and a bunch of radios and shows up at 1 o'clock in the morning. And on one day, I see an example of a perfect sportsman gentleman and my dad thinking it's funny as hell to riot and burn part of Washington, D.C. that night. That day will stand out in my life forever.
Wow, David, you have had more experience than way more than I know.
Well,
yeah, the book just there's so much to it. Now I want to give a chance to make sure we get to
some questions. Yes. Tricia Braid, who's been active in our chat tonight, says it's interesting to consider.
She's a close friend.
And she didn't really ask.
Girl, love you, Trish.
It's not really a question, but just something to talk about. It's interesting to consider how important it was to have a community with which you could connect, even if most people likely realized you weren't authentic to the Navajo community. Can you talk about that? I mean, did people? Do you think people were onto you? And
well, my wife thinks everybody knew what a little cretin I was, and for all I know, they did. So I was my town paper boy, right?
Yeah.
And so to get myself through the day, I had what I call the Crow Craziness Index. I rated you from 1 to 5. So we had a Catholic priest who wore one sock and his pants leg was up above his knee, and he would tell me that he was here on earth to save the Navajos from, terrible things, and that he was bringing them all these blessings. And he was drunk all the time, and he would make me swear that I loved Jesus in front of him. And I said, "I'll only do it if you give me a tip, because if Jesus loves me, you'll give me 50 cents." And I would mess with this guy, right? And I had the Justice of the Peace was so drunk that he would come out in boxer shorts that were caked in feces and urine, and he had a white beater T-shirt with 500 cigarette burns and a hat that smelled like a brewery, and he would fire a gun in the air when I would collect from it. And I would go to all these crazy places, some hogans, some trailers, some the white people, and I kept this index in my head of the craziest customers I had and the funniest. But there was a man named Earl Ashcroft who's 95, and Earl ran the Fort Defiance Trading Post. So Mormons came to Arizona and New Mexico. And if you were white in Arizona and New Mexico, you were almost always Mormon when I was a kid. And they all ran trading posts. And Earl would let me stay inside his trading post at the end of my paper route. And he spoke 5 languages: Navajo, Zuni, Ute, Arapaho, and Spanish. And if I was good, which was hard for me, I could follow him around and he would talk to them in languages, and he would give them goods for their sheep and their wool. And he would teach me about Arizona history, and he would teach me about what happened during the long walk. He grew up in another reservation trading post with his dad. He spoke Navajo before English. And so I would hang out with Earl. And if my dad beat me real bad, Earl said, "I knew that you would be waiting for me, leaned up against the door at 6 a.m. and that I would let you in and I'd let you have some food before you went to school." He said, I just went back to see him a year ago, June, and he said, "I always knew if I found you on the door that your dad had beat you real bad." And Earl took care of him. The Coons family took care of him. Once you stay about 3 years on a reservation and they treat you like you're an Indian. So by the time I left, I felt like I was Indian. They were my people, and they took care of me. And I was always one of those kids. I always wanted to learn everything about everybody all the time. And any interesting fact, I wanted to know it. And I would try to befriend any adult, and I would talk to any adult who would talk to me. It didn't matter. And I found a way to cut and paste my way through. I created my own community my entire life by piecing things together, people together. And I knew more about people in the town than anybody. I was always like that, right?
A writer from the start. So, I'm sorry that I haven't read enough of the book. I only just started it, and I'm going to finish it this weekend because I cannot put it down. But Sue wants to know, have you ever reconnected with Molly? That part of your story broke my heart. And I don't know who Molly is, so I'm going to throw that out. And
college sweetheart or high school sweetheart, right?
So I fessed up to my wife and family. So Molly, not to do a spoiler alert, my dad was involved in a real murder when I was a junior in college, and I pieced together that he did it. And Molly said her dad was a retired National Hockey League player and an insurance guy, and his mom was the All-American mom, and she's from the All-American family. And they invited me over a few times. They liked me, and they said, well, you're going to go meet your dad. I'm like, no, you're not. Molly said, don't worry, we'll love you anyway, and your dad will be fine. I'm like, no, he won't. So I acted out and broke up with Molly and did every stupid thing that a completely immature, ridiculous, horrible college kid could do, and I could do it all, right? And at graduation, no one came. My older sister would have, but I didn't let her. But no one came. So I showed up to get my diploma, and Molly spotted me. And her family came over, and they invited me over to dinner then. And they said, don't worry, we'll love you, Muslim. We need to get back together. And I looked at her and I said, I have absolutely nothing to offer you. I turned and walked away. Well, she kept up with some friends of mine, and she asked about me through the years. And about 3 years ago, when the book, 2 years ago, when the book came out, she sent me a 4-page email. I read the book, and now I understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you just tell me? I said, oh, okay. Why didn't I tell you my dad buried a guy in West Virginia? Why didn't I tell you that he beat my mother and left her for dead and homeless? Why didn't I tell you that he had been in San Quentin and admitted to me he killed other people that he was never charged with? Why didn't I do any of that? Because you and I were 21 years old, and your family isn't going to want me in your family. No one would want me in their family. I don't want to be in my family. So, Molly, am I sorry? No. At 60 something, do I regret that that I may have loved you? No. I mean, you married, you had kids, you're happy. I did the same thing. You can't go back in time and make this better. And so she sent me another email, and then that was it. I said, no, you don't need to be doing any more of this. You're completely wrong. You're the most lovable guy in the world. And I go, yeah. Hold on. With what I was going through. And this is even before the showdown piece, no more spoil, where my dad tries to kill my stepmother. I mean, like, this crap never ended, right? This just kept going on and on. And there's no way that she
Molly, if you're in the chat, let us know.
I'm guessing you changed her name, David, or is she in fact Molly?
No, I changed. Her name was similar to Molly. It wasn't Molly.
Okay,
so,
we don't.
I have a group of fraternity brothers that, and we have a party once a year, the Saturday after New Year's in Annapolis. And one of my longest old friends is her next door neighbor. And he said, hey, you ought to come by and have coffee with her. And I said, never.
Yeah.
If I did, I'd bring my wife, but who would think the whole thing was stupid. I think a lot of things I do are stupid, and she may have a point there. But I have no desire to go back and relive with Molly. When I told her I had nothing to offer her, I had nothing to offer.
Well, and that's a good segue. There are a couple more questions, one of which it might be a spoiler, so I'm going to save that, but just because it makes sense to ask Kathleen's question next. Can you speak about PTSD, closure, and how you are now emotionally? And
Some would tell you I'm crazier than hell, and maybe I am. I'd like to think I'm mostly normal most of the time. I still love to have fun. I cut up with my family and friends, and I still love to tell a good story and joke. I think I'm a good person. I try to be a kind person. I mentored a lot of college kids and done my best to help people all along the way. I've been incredibly blessed. Again, the family I married into and the community they offer. My two children are amazing, fantastic people. They married amazing, fantastic people. My wife had a son who's like a son to me, and his wife is like a daughter to me, and they just brought us a grandson yesterday. So I'm an incredibly blessed guy, right? My goal in life is to hang on to what I've got and to treat people the way they should be treated. And because I get treated so well. And I do think one thing my wife will tell you, and I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes screaming, and I have times where I just have to get out of bed and walk like a mile around. And she knows this. And not long ago, she said you were slugging your pillow and you were crying, and you got up and just bolted out. And I said, I don't want to talk about it. I wish I didn't, but there are times that I can't get this out of my head. But I try most days I can. I'm not mean to people. I may tease them too hard. I think I do. I think I am too much of a smart aleck and all that. But I don't have a mean bone in my body, and I really don't. And if I see somebody being mean to somebody, I get incredibly protective. I was in a place about 15 years ago, and a man hit a woman, and I just grabbed him by the neck. Said, "You don't get out of this place, I'm going to break your neck." And I know I shouldn't have done that, but when I see some man being violent to a woman or something, really,
I kind of think you did the right thing.
Well, tried to raise my kids the opposite, but I was an emotional mess, and I don't think I was a very good father, and I have great regrets about that. I tried to be a much better older father than I was. I didn't have any of my own issues sorted out. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go.
Yeah, everybody has to chart their own course and learn along the way. So I would think maybe don't beat yourself up too much. Now I'm going to switch gears. This is maybe a spoiler, and I don't know what this refers to, but Angie wants to know: was the buried body in Wheeling ever investigated?
I get asked that. No. So interestingly, I ran that part of the book by a couple of lawyers. The reason I left the West Virginia part in is I didn't sugarcoat anything. If I did something bad, you know it. If I did something good, you know it. If something happened to me, I told it. You can't, somebody said, just leave that out. Well, that's cherry picking, right? Yeah. So I'm the great guy and I just skip around. But what the lawyers told me is, one, a book is not a confession. Two, you're not 100% sure there was a body buried, although I know there was. My dad was hanging out with very bad guys. They were fencing stolen things, merchandise. Did the same thing on the reservation. He did this in West Virginia. Whoever got killed either betrayed him and his guys or was going to betray him. And I'm sure he was not the kind of guy that regularly ran Sunday school or was the town philanthropist. I'm sure he's just as big a scumbag as my dad and his associates were. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever investigated that murder. So when I get a really nasty email, it's like, you aided and abetted a murder. Well, no, I did not. What I did was come and get my dad, who told me, don't worry about what's buried. But of course, I'm not an idiot. Knew that he wasn't a deer, wasn't a dog. We had a huge fight. told him I'd never go along with anything he ever did. Cowardly of me not to turn him into the police right then and there. I admit it. I admit I was still underneath him. When he went to murder my stepmother, he thought he still had complete control of me based on that incident and a lot of others. And part of the story, and no matter what I've told, there's still plenty to learn. How I broke free and how I stopped him was using a lifetime of knowing everything about him and knowing how he thought before he thought it, or he did before he did. I'm very ashamed of what happened to West Virginia. I'm very ashamed I did not do the right thing. I can honestly tell you it ruined the next 5 or 6 years of my life. I got good jobs, but I was terrified somebody would find out. And it was absolutely the deal breaker for Molly, right? Because this happened during my courtship with Molly and getting the whole next year we dated. Of course, I'm dating a person knowing I can't go forward with her because I can't. And she's going with me thinking, oh, whatever it is, it can't be that bad. And I put us on a collision course, but it really hurt me. I know I did, and I really regret that. But as I told her in that email, I freed her to meet somebody that her family would find acceptable, that her family would be proud to be grandparents to kids she had. And I did her the biggest favor of her life because I could not have brought her anything good. The West Virginia thing really, really took a dent out of my life for a long, long time. And I'm sure that people who are critical of me would say, well, it should have. You did the wrong thing. You didn't turn him in. But I feel like it's almost like a prison sentence for me, too. When you do something, when you don't do something you should have done, it's a big thing. It stays with you. And I'm sure that the times I wake up in the middle of the night screaming, that some of it's about that. The rest of it's about not saving my mom.
Well, you've done a great thing with this, and I thank you for sharing your story with us and with our audience and with the world. And it was a brave thing to do. And as you said, hopefully it was cathartic and helped you put some things behind you. Folks, if you didn't want to buy this book at the beginning of this talk, I cannot imagine that you are not ready to click that link that Jacques just reposted. Jacques, thank you for your, as always, thoughtful reading and thoughtful questions. You're always amazing. And David, welcome to the Mark Twain House family. And we hope we'll see you again soon. And we hope to host you for a tour of the house when it's safe for you to travel here. Not too far. So,
no, I'll come to you, and I would love to be on any time. And incredible pleasure to be in front of you. And again, thank my family and all the new friends I met tonight. And it was my honor to be in front of you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Jacques, and thank you, audience. Do buy the book, and you can watch this over and over again if you like. It's recorded, and it'll be up on our website tomorrow. So, marktwainhouse.org, and good night, everybody. Thanks for sharing this time with us. Good night, David. Good night, Jacques.
Good night.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.